For 10 long years, I woke up to the same routine: prepare breakfast, pack lunches, clean the house, and then start over again the next day. My husband barely noticed me. He came home late, buried himself in his work, and the only words he said to me were about bills and chores. I felt like a ghost, drifting through my own life, unseen and unheard. But it was the day my 15-year-old son looked me in the eyes and said, "You're just a housewife," that shattered me completely. Just a housewife. Was that all I had become? I remembered the woman I once was: ambitious, vibrant, full of dreams. I had put my career on hold to raise our son, to be there for every scraped knee and every homework assignment. And yet, here I was, being dismissed as nothing more than a maid who cooked and cleaned. That night, as I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the glass window, something inside me broke open. I couldn't keep living this way, ignored, unappreciated, and invisible. It was time to change, to reclaim the woman I once was. I started by setting small goals. I signed up for a fitness class, started journaling, and revisited old hobbies that once brought me joy. I joined a book club, reconnected with friends, and even started volunteering at the local community center. The more I did for myself, the more alive I felt. My husband barely noticed at first. He was too wrapped up in his own world to see the transformation happening right in front of him. But my son did. One evening, as I was getting ready to attend a community event, he watched me with wide eyes. "You look different, Mom," he said. I smiled. "I feel different." I left the house that evening feeling a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. The event was a fundraiser for a local women's shelter, and as I mingled with the crowd, I met women from all walks of life: lawyers, artists, teachers, entrepreneurs. They spoke of their passions, their struggles, and their triumphs. Listening to their stories, I realized I wasn't alone. Many of them had faced the same feeling of invisibility, the same loss of identity. But they had reclaimed their voices, and I was determined to do the same. The next morning, I sat down with my husband. For the first time in years, I told him how I felt, how lonely and unappreciated I had been. At first, he seemed confused, even defensive. "But you have everything," he said. "A house, a family, a comfortable life." "But I don't have myself," I replied, tears welling up in my eyes. "I've lost who I am." The conversation was painful, but it was a start. Over the next few months, I continued to carve out time for myself. I enrolled in an online course to finish my degree, started a blog to share my journey, and even signed up for a painting class. Slowly, I began to rediscover the woman I once was. One evening, as I was writing a new blog post, my son came into the room. He sat beside me, watching me type. "I didn't mean to hurt you that day," he said quietly. "When I called you just a housewife." I put my hand over his. "I know," I said. "And I'm not just a housewife anymore. I'm me." As the weeks passed, I felt a shift within myself. I was no longer just the woman who took care of the house and the family. I was reclaiming parts of myself that had been buried for years. My confidence grew as I poured my thoughts into my blog, gaining a small but supportive following. My writing was raw, honest, and filled with the kind of vulnerability that resonated with other women. One evening, after a particularly inspiring conversation with a fellow blogger, I decided to take the next step. I signed up for a public speaking workshop. The thought of speaking in front of a crowd terrified me, but I knew it was a challenge I needed to face. I needed to prove to myself that I was more than the quiet woman behind closed doors. The first few sessions were a blur of nervousness and self-doubt. But with each passing class, I grew stronger. I learned how to project my voice, how to command a room, and how to embrace the vulnerability that comes with sharing my story. Slowly, the fear began to fade, replaced by a sense of empowerment. One day, I was asked to speak at a local event for women, an event that celebrated women's achievements and the challenges they had overcome. I was nervous, of course, but I knew this was my moment. As I stood before the audience, my heart raced, but I felt more alive than I had in years. I shared my journey of rediscovery, of the struggles I had faced, and the strength I had found in reclaiming my voice. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not as a wife, not as a mother, but as myself. And it was enough. The applause still echoed in my ears as I left the stage, but the feeling inside me was something I hadn't experienced in a long time: pride. For the first time, I truly believed in my own strength. I had stood in front of a crowd, exposed my vulnerabilities, and shared a story that was not only mine, but that of so many others. It felt like a new chapter in my life had begun. As the days passed, I began to see changes not only in myself, but also in my relationships. My husband, who had been skeptical at first, began to see the shift in me. We had more open and honest conversations, and although there were still moments of misunderstanding, we were making progress. One evening, after dinner, my husband sat beside me, holding my hand. "I can see you're different," he said quietly. "Not in a bad way, but you're more yourself." I smiled and nodded, squeezing his hand. "I'm still your wife," I said, "but I'm also me. And I think that's what we both need." It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but I knew we were heading in the right direction. I had reclaimed parts of myself I thought I had lost forever, but it wasn't just my family who noticed. I began to receive messages from women all over, thanking me for my blog, for my story. Some were strangers, others old friends, but all of them shared the same sentiment: they felt inspired. It was then that I realized how many women were silently fighting the same battle I had. And through my words, my story, and my journey, I was able to show them they weren't alone. It wasn't about the titles we wore or the roles we played. It was about remembering who we were before all the labels were attached. It was about rediscovering the passion, the drive, and the strength that lay within us all along. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just a personal transformation, it was a movement. A quiet revolution happening within me and countless other women who, for too long, had lived beneath the weight of societal expectations. We were more than the roles we played. We were more than the labels society had placed on us. We were complex, powerful, creative, and capable of so much more than we ever imagined. With each passing day, I felt more connected to the woman I had once been, and to the women who were discovering their voices alongside me. My blog became more than just a platform for my story, it became a space for others to share theirs. I received messages from women of all ages, backgrounds, and experiences, and they all had one thing in common: they were searching for something more, just like I had been. One day, a woman named Marie left a comment on my blog that made me pause. She wrote, "I feel like you're telling my story. For years, I've been stuck, unsure of who I am outside of being a mother and a wife. But your words have given me hope. I've started looking into things I love again: art, writing, yoga. Thank you for sharing your journey." Her words brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't about just me anymore, it was about all of us. Every woman who had ever felt lost, overlooked, or invisible. Every woman who had put herself last for too long. In the weeks that followed, I continued to explore the things that brought me joy. I wrote more, painted more, and spent time with the women who had become part of my community. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment I had never known before. I was no longer waiting for permission to be myself, and in that process, I learned something profound. Happiness doesn't come from external validation or meeting the expectations of others. It comes from within, from the quiet, persistent voice that says, "You are enough just as you are." As the months passed, I found myself speaking at more events, women's empowerment workshops, community gatherings, and even a few podcasts. Each time I shared my story, I was met with the same understanding, the same knowing nods from women who had been where I once was. It wasn't just about overcoming the feeling of being just a housewife. It was about reclaiming our worth and redefining ourselves on our own terms. I remember one particular evening after a speech at a local women's conference. A woman came up to me, her eyes bright with gratitude. She said, "I've been a stay-at-home mom for years, and I've lost myself in the process. But hearing your story made me realize that I still have time to rediscover who I am. Thank you for giving me the courage to take that first step." Her words resonated with me deeply because I had been there too. I knew what it was like to feel invisible, to feel like my life was on hold. And I knew how powerful it was to finally step into my own power and reclaim my identity. That was when I truly understood that my journey wasn't just about me. It was about the women who had shared their stories with me, the women who were still finding their way, and the women who hadn't yet realized that they, too, could be more than just the titles they wore. So, I decided to make it my mission to help other women rediscover themselves. I started offering mentorship and coaching, guiding women through the process of self-reflection, self-discovery, and self-empowerment. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Every woman who found her voice, every woman who stepped into her power, made the journey all the more meaningful, and in the process, I discovered something even more profound. We are not defined by the roles we play in life. We are defined by our ability to adapt, to grow, and to always be willing to evolve. As I grew more confident in my own journey, I realized that my transformation wasn't just about personal growth. It was about the impact I could have on others. I began to create online spaces for women to share their experiences, offer support, and hold each other accountable. These groups grew quickly, and I saw something amazing unfold. Women from all backgrounds, ages, and walks of life came together with a shared goal: to find themselves again. Through these groups, I learned that the idea of losing yourself wasn't unique to any one person. It was something that many women experienced at different points in their lives, whether they were stay-at-home moms, career women, or retirees. The common thread was the desire to feel valued, to be seen as more than just the roles we play. One day, a woman named Karen reached out to me privately. She was in her early 50s, and had recently retired from a career she had loved for decades. Now, she was struggling with her sense of identity. "I spent so many years working, and now that it's over, I don't know who I am," she confessed. "I don't feel like I matter anymore." Her words hit me hard. I knew exactly how she felt. I had been there myself. But I also knew something she didn't. Karen still had so much to give. It wasn't about the job title, or the career accolades. It was about the person she had become through the work she had done. I reminded her of all the lives she had touched, the impact she had made, and how she had helped shape the world in her own quiet way. Karen's story is one of many. Each woman I work with, each story I hear, teaches me something new. And as I continue my own journey, I understand now that it's not about getting back to who we were before. It's about creating a new version of ourselves. A stronger, more confident, and more authentic version. As the months passed, my life began to look different in ways I never anticipated. I was no longer just the person who cleaned the house, cooked the meals, or ran errands. I was someone with purpose, someone with a voice that had something important to say. Every step I took toward rediscovering myself brought me closer to understanding my worth and my power as an individual. One of the most empowering moments came when I had the opportunity to speak at a local women's conference. The event was organized to inspire women to take charge of their lives and embrace their full potential. I was terrified at the thought of standing in front of so many people, but I knew that this was my chance to share my story. To let others know they weren't alone in their struggles. When my time came, I stood at the podium, the nerves in my stomach twisting like knots. But then I looked out at the sea of women before me, each one with her own journey, her own story, her own battles, and I took a deep breath. I shared my truth, how I had felt invisible, how I had lost myself in the roles I played, and how I found the strength to reclaim my identity. I talked about the power of community, the importance of taking time for yourself, and how we all have the ability to rediscover our passions, no matter where we are in life. The applause that followed was overwhelming, but it wasn't just about the applause. It was about the connections I made that day, the women who approached me afterward to share their own stories. They thanked me for giving them hope, for showing them that it was never too late to start over, to embrace who they truly were. It was in that moment that I realized just how much power we have as women, not just in our ability to transform ourselves, but in our ability to help others do the same. The months that followed were filled with small victories and moments of quiet reflection. My blog began to gain a steady following. Women from all over reached out, sharing their experiences and expressing how my words resonated with them. It was humbling to know that my journey was helping others on theirs, and it fueled me to keep going. I poured more of myself into my writing, each post a step closer to understanding the depth of my own transformation. My relationship with my husband began to shift as well. In the past, our conversations often revolved around the surface level: who would pick up the groceries, what the kids needed, what was happening at work. But as I began to open up more about my own feelings and desires, he started to listen differently. He saw the change in me, and though it was sometimes difficult for him to fully understand, he supported me in ways he never had before. We started having deeper conversations about what we both wanted out of life. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when I felt frustrated that he didn't completely grasp the weight of what I had been through. But I realized that this was part of the journey, the process of learning to communicate openly, of allowing each other to evolve and grow. We didn't have to have all the answers right away. What mattered was that we were willing to try. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, I looked at him and said, "I want to continue growing, to keep finding new pieces of myself. But I want you to be part of that. Not as my caretaker, not as my provider, but as my partner." He smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'm here, every step of the way," and for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. As time went on, my sense of self continued to blossom. I was no longer defined solely by the roles I had played in my family and community. I was evolving, becoming someone who was more than just a wife and mother. I was a woman with her own dreams, ambitions, and desires. And that woman deserved to be seen, heard, and valued. I found that the more I embraced this newfound identity, the more my relationships deepened. With my husband, we became more than just cohabitants running a household together. We became partners again, partners in every sense of the word. We began to rediscover the joy in the small things, in the quiet moments we once took for granted. The simple act of sitting together without distractions became a profound connection. With my children, there was an understanding that I wasn't just their mother. I was a person in my own right. I had needs, I had desires, and I had passions. And those passions were worth pursuing, just as much as their own dreams were. My son, especially, had grown into a young man with more respect for who I was beyond my role as his parent. He began to view me as someone with stories to tell, experiences to share, and wisdom to impart. But it wasn't only my immediate family who began to see the shift. The women I met through my blog, the women I met at events, and even those who were still in my circle, everyone began to notice the change. I wasn't just the quiet woman in the background anymore. I was a woman who had found her voice and was unafraid to speak her truth. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a local conference for women's empowerment. I stood before a room filled with faces of all ages, and for the first time, I wasn't nervous. I spoke about the journey I had been on, the pain of feeling invisible, and the joy that came with reclaiming my identity. As I spoke, I could see the eyes of the women in the room lighting up, nodding along, some even wiping away tears. It was in that moment I realized how powerful this journey had been, not just for me, but for everyone I had touched along the way. Afterward, a woman approached me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've inspired me," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel like I can finally breathe again," and in that moment, I understood the true significance of my story. It wasn't just mine, it was a story shared by so many women, a story of rediscovery, empowerment, and the strength to rise from the shadows. From that day forward, I continued to use my voice and my platform to encourage other women to take control of their narratives. The journey wasn't always easy, but it was worth every step. I received messages daily from women who shared their struggles, their triumphs, and their fears. I listened to their stories with empathy and compassion, offering advice, guidance, and a listening ear. I realized that while my journey was uniquely mine, it mirrored the experiences of countless others. Together, we were building a community of women who had reclaimed their identities and were no longer afraid to be seen. As my blog grew, so did my confidence. I no longer feared judgment or criticism. The fear of being seen as selfish, or as someone who didn't appreciate the life I had dissipated. I understood that taking time for myself, nurturing my passions, and embracing my individuality didn't make me any less of a mother or wife. It made me more of a woman, and a better person in all aspects of my life. My relationship with my husband, too, evolved in ways I hadn't expected. We began to support each other's individual goals and dreams, while also cherishing the bond we had built over the years. We made time for each other, and through our shared experiences, we found a new sense of closeness. He had come to appreciate the woman I was becoming, the woman I had always been underneath the layers of roles and responsibilities. It wasn't long before I felt the pull to expand my influence beyond the online world. I began organizing women's gatherings in my community, creating spaces for women to come together and share their stories. The events were filled with laughter, tears, and a sense of solidarity. It was clear to me that when women supported each other, incredible things happened. We empowered one another, and in doing so, we created a ripple effect that spread throughout our families, workplaces, and communities. Through these gatherings, I met women who had gone through their own struggles with identity and self-worth. Some had spent years feeling invisible, just as I had, while others were just beginning to explore who they were beyond their responsibilities. We shared resources, offered advice, and most importantly, we listened. Sometimes, that was all a woman needed, someone to listen, without judgment, without expectation. My own growth didn't stop at reclaiming my identity, it evolved into something greater. I began to feel a deep sense of purpose in helping other women realize their worth, and that realization became the foundation for everything I did. My voice was no longer just my own. It was a voice for every woman who had ever felt like she was just a housewife, a mother, or a daughter, but never truly herself. And so, as I continued this journey, I found that the most fulfilling part wasn't the recognition, the blog posts, or even the public speaking. It was the connections I made along the way. The women who reached out to me, the ones who found the courage to step into their own power, and the ones who reminded me of the strength that lies in unity. We were no longer isolated. We were a collective force, one that could change the world, one woman at a time. As time passed, my journey became an ever-evolving story of transformation, not just for me, but for the many women I encountered along the way. The more I shared my experiences, the more I realized how much we needed to have these conversations. The conversations about self-worth, personal identity, and the courage it takes to reclaim the woman within. In a world that constantly demands so much from us, it's easy to forget who we are beneath the expectations and roles we play. One of the most beautiful things I learned during this time was the power of vulnerability. It was through being open about my struggles, my fears, and my triumphs that I truly connected with others. I saw how women, young and old, longed for the same thing I had: permission to be themselves, to explore their own passions, and to embrace the fullness of who they were. I realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. And it was the key to fostering deeper connections, whether with family, friends, or fellow women. In the years that followed, I ventured into new territories. I began to write more extensively, not just for my blog, but for larger publications, speaking at conferences, and mentoring other women who were on their own paths to rediscovering themselves. I created workshops and retreats where women could come together, share their stories, and empower each other to live lives of authenticity. These experiences became the catalyst for even greater change. Watching women shed the layers of doubt and self-criticism, witnessing their transformation, and knowing that I had played a part in it, was incredibly rewarding. But perhaps the most powerful shift was within my family. My relationship with my children evolved in ways I hadn't anticipated. They saw me not just as their mother, but as a woman with her own dreams and desires. My son, who had once called me just a housewife, became one of my biggest supporters. He would often share how proud he was of me, not just for the things I had accomplished, but for the woman I had become. Our conversations were deeper, more meaningful, and based on mutual respect. I had shown him that it was possible to pursue one's passions, to challenge societal expectations, and to always prioritize self-love. My relationship with my husband also blossomed in new ways. It was no longer about the roles we played in each other's lives. It was about the partnership we shared as two individuals who respected and nurtured each other's growth. We learned how to communicate openly, honestly, and without fear. There was no more resentment, no more hidden emotions simmering beneath the surface. Our bond was stronger because we had both found ourselves again. By this point, I had fully embraced the notion that self-empowerment wasn't just about individual success. It was about community and connection. I had learned that as women, we rise by lifting each other up. I saw this truth play out time and again, in every conversation, every collaboration, and every story shared. The more I gave, the more I received in return. This cycle of giving and receiving, of supporting and being supported, created a ripple effect that spread throughout every aspect of my life. But as with any journey, there were challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I was doing enough, or whether I was truly making a difference. But I reminded myself that the impact wasn't always immediate or visible. Sometimes, the most important work happens in quiet moments, when a woman sends you a message saying that your words helped her make a life-changing decision. Or when a woman tells you she finally started pursuing her dreams, because of something you said. Those moments were worth every challenge, every setback, and every sacrifice, and so, my journey continues. It's not about a destination, but about the ongoing process of growth, learning, and connection. I no longer define myself by what I do or the titles I hold. I am simply a woman who is always evolving, always striving to be the best version of myself, while helping others do the same. The road ahead may not always be easy, but I know now that the power to overcome, to thrive, and to live authentically lies within each of us. And as long as I continue to share my story, to listen to others, and to offer support and encouragement, I will always be part of this larger movement, a movement that celebrates the strength, resilience, and brilliance of women everywhere. Final thought, as I reflect on my journey, I realize that reclaiming my identity was not just about personal fulfillment, but about showing other women that it's never too late to rediscover who we are. The path to empowerment is not linear, nor is it always easy, but it is deeply rewarding. We are not defined by the roles we play, or the expectations society places on us. We are defined by our courage to be authentic, our willingness to evolve, and our commitment to supporting one another. By embracing our vulnerabilities and celebrating our strengths, we not only transform ourselves, but also create a ripple effect that empowers others to do the same. The journey is ongoing, and as long as we continue to grow, to lift each other up, and to share our stories, we will continue to pave the way for generations of women to live lives of purpose, fulfillment, and authenticity.